Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. This podcast episode discusses the details of domestic violence. If this episode becomes triggering while you are listening, practice self-care and turn off the episode. If you need to talk to someone, 1-800-799-7233. All the links are provided in the show notes.
Hi, everyone. This is Brenda J. Welcome to Real People, Real Voices, where people get to have a voice, and some for the first time. These are mini podcasts that focus on healing. I am so excited. So without further ado, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. Today we have Irma on the show. Irma is an abuse survivor and is going to share her story and journey of healing. Welcome to the show, Irma.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hi, Irma. This is Karen.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
So do you mind sharing a little of your story of abuse?
It goes back to my childhood. Growing up in LA with a Hispanic family, my dad was a drinker and a gambler, and then abusing my mother along with us, not realizing that he had 11 other kids because he would be gone for weekends at a time and weeks at a time, and I didn't know why. And when he'd come back drunk, and he would hit my mom. My mom was young. She was only 15 when she met my dad. My dad was in his early 30s with another family. So not realizing this, but the abuse just for my childhood was a constant, but it was a norm for us, right? So in the Hispanic culture, you get looked at cross-eyed, you know that you're doing wrong and you need to walk on a straight line. But that was difficult to go through with that abuse for my brothers and I. But being the middle child, I have the middle child syndrome that didn't help either. So that kind of evolved to a normal environment for me as I went to school because I never spoke at what took place in the home. My bruises were never really visible because the welts were on my shoulder, my back, my buttocks. So it was, even though I'd go to school like a happy-go-lucky because I was socializing with other kids, but when I got home from school, it was a different story. So as I evolved to a teenager, I couldn't wait to go to work to get outside of the home. So from school, I went to work. But then the abuse was still as a teenager and a young adult. And eventually, at the age of 20, I ended up getting pregnant and leaving the home and living out of my car for a couple of weeks because I had nowhere to go. So that was a challenge there. And then I ended up pregnant and married because that was the cultural way. Because you're pregnant, you have to get married. That lasted for a year and a half because he was an alcoholic and coming home at 1, 2 in the morning, abusing, kicking me off the bed. Then my son was not even a year, probably 9 months old. It's like this wasn't a relationship I wanted to have with my son, to be exposed to it, to think it's normal. So then I left that relationship back in my car and struggling with that and still trying to work a full-time job while paying daycare for my son and trying to support him on my own as a single mom. I ended up meeting my other husband who was in the Navy, thinking he'd be good to me, finding out also that he was married after 2 years in a relationship, finding out he was married with 2 kids. By then I was already pregnant. And so 20 years of bad relationship with him, and he was a drug addict and he was a womanizer. Eventually figured this was kind of a norm relationship throughout the years. This is it. This is what I'm accustomed to. This is what my mom went through. This is what I grew up with. So I did it for my kids and thought this was normal, and to go to work every day and pretending everything was okay, not knowing what I was going to come home to. Eventually, I didn't have the opportunity to express my emotions. I couldn't cry. I couldn't be upset because I had no right to. And my boys would spend most of the time in their room because I didn't want to expose them in this relationship. So that was 20 years of that.
Wow. Well, what was a turning point in the relationship and how did you get out?
Where he eventually beat me enough where he left. I called the police, but he left before the police came. And my oldest already had moved out. My youngest was still at home. And eventually that was just the point that I was done. That day I went and changed the locks and he couldn't come back in. I stopped answering his phone calls and just kind of struggled in my own way. And yes, I went into a depression because he left basically without any financial support. So he didn't help me with our son. He didn't help me with the mortgage. He didn't help me with our car payments. I was left with the bag trying to pay out the bills. And by then it was back when the economy crashed back in 2008, 2009, I was unemployed. So I ended up in a deep, deep depression. And my youngest came from skateboarding outside and he was so scared. And he's like, Mom, what's wrong? Mom, get up. Mom, get out. And that eventually it snapped me out to say, okay, I can't have my son see me like this. So then eventually I evolved to soul searching. Who am I? I've been in these marriages and abusive childhood. Who am I? What do I want? What I don't want? I didn't finish high school. I didn't get a high school diploma because my dad took me out of school. He beat me so bad that I couldn't go to school and I didn't get my high school diploma. So I decided to go back to school. I ended up getting a Pell Grant and went to the community college. It took me 5 years to get a 2-year degree because I didn't have a high school diploma. And then after 3 years of soul searching, of finding out what I wanted, I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life by myself. You know, I was 45 years old. I wanted companionship, but I wasn't looking for someone to financially support me. I wasn't looking for someone to change who I was as a person. I became very independent of myself. So
What I love is when you first told me your story, I just really liked how you approached dating again. Can you tell our listeners more about that and how it led to your current relationship?
after being in school for about a year, I went on this dating site called plentyoffish.com. Still unemployed.
I've been on.
Yeah, Karen's been on that one.
So it was very interesting. So plentyoffish.com. So I had a friend that worked at the TGIF and I would meet the dates there. So this way I wasn't by myself. So the dates never picked me up at home. I always met them at the restaurant. And a lot of these gentlemen were pretty much single, but there was a lot of bad qualities in them that reminded me of my ex-husband. But every good quality that they had, I would pull that good quality and put it a side note. And the next date, there was another good quality. So then I would pull that quality because at this point, I didn't know what I wanted, right? In a relationship. I knew what I didn't want in a relationship. I knew I didn't want an alcoholic. I didn't want a drug addict. I wanted somebody. I didn't know what I wanted, but as going through these dates, there was qualities that attracted me. So for every date that I went to, they had a special quality that I would put a side note. And not knowing mentally, I was building this man in my mind. And here, 6 months into dating, I built this man. And when I met my current husband and we started talking, he had every quality that I built. The relationship with their mother, right? If they have a good relationship with their mother and they respect their mother, then they're going to respect me. And he had an amazing relationship with his mother. He had an amazing relationship with his kids. So he checked on every box, the man that I built, the height, the age, the respect. He never spoke bad about his ex-wife. He never called her any names. He just said it didn't work out. We went separate ways. And we would talk on the phone since I was unemployed. We would talk on the phone until the sun came out every day of the week. And eventually when we went out and met for dinner, he was exactly what I was looking for that I didn't even know that I was looking for. But he had all of those qualities.
Yeah. And that's just a great way to, I didn't realize you had so many, that you grew up with childhood abuse and then you had 2 abusive marriages or relationships long term before him. So that's a really great way to make sure that you don't fall into that pattern again, because that's a lot to endure what you endured in your life. And I'm sorry you had to go through that.
But it did make me who I am today. And those are the choices that I made. So at this relationship, He's never tried to change me. He respects me in every which way. He's never called me names. He's never lifted a hand. He lets me be independent. I'm a realtor and he knows what that takes me in the networking events with clients. He's someone that if I have a bad day, he's like my big teddy bear. I have someone to go to and just cry in his arms with no question, right? I didn't have that before. I didn't have it growing up. My parents never told me they loved me. I've never felt that hug and the kiss and the I love yous. I didn't have that in my relationship, my past relationship. Yeah. So everything I didn't have, he gave me and he still gives me.
Yeah. So many people don't realize that you tend to attract what you're comfortable with, even though it's not healthy.
Yeah. It reminds me of what Jenny Larson said. There's nothing better than a good relationship, but there's nothing worse than a bad one.
Yeah.
You know what was
your example of a good one and how you're so happy now because I know you personally and you're just thriving in life. And it's just, I almost can't even, I'm in disbelief at what you went through because of how well you're doing. That's what a thriving, good relationship can do for you. That's healthy.
Yeah. I was just saying the time that you gave yourself to heal and the wisdom that you used in your dating allowed you to not follow the past patterns. You were to break that cycle and, not getting into another abusive relationship. Is there any other gold nugget of advice you'd want to share to other listeners?
What was sad is that I started questioning this good relationship. The first 6 months, I was questioning it because it was so good. And I thought something was going to go wrong. And I'm like, this is not normal. This is not a normal relationship based on my past. And it's like, for me to have to question that was not fair to me or fair to him. And he didn't understand why I was questioning the relationship. Yeah. And then we figured like, this is a healthy relationship. This is the relationship that is considered healthy. And I never had it before. So I hold on to it. I treasure it. I respect him and he respects me and the love that we have for each other. It's like they're out there, right? Not all men are alike. You just can't, you have to close the book to your past. And that's why I did the 3 years of soul searching because I had to make sure I closed that book. I didn't want my past to come into a new relationship. Right. We don't want that layover relationship. Right. I was okay being by myself for 3 years to find myself. And once I found myself, then I was able to give myself 110% of myself.
I love that advice. I love that advice right there to take that 3 years. Because a lot of people think they have to, and I've taken 4 already, but people jump into another one when they're just not quite ready.
So many people rebound. They go right into another relationship because they can't stand to be alone.
So I love that gold nugget. That is awesome. And then was there anything else that you did to heal outside of just the soul searching? Did you go like any form of exercise, anything else you did?
I love dancing. I would go dancing, meeting a lot of people at school. And getting educated. I come from LA and the Hispanic culture. So I had to learn how to separate my Spanish and English because it would evolve to Spanglish. So it's challenging through the years.
I'm very good at Spanglish.
So that was kind of challenging because people would judge me on that. Right. And so I needed and school helped me divide the English and the Spanish because I took both English and Spanish. So I ended up continue going to school and that helped me with my healing and meeting other people. And I ended up with 2 associate's degrees. I ended up with certificates with those 2 associates. I did 6 years of college and keep in mind, it was all part-time while I was working full-time work. And then eventually I went to real estate school and got my real estate license. But that whole process was the support from my husband. Yeah. Never once did he stop me from trying to find myself and trying to educate myself and the 110%, not only the emotional side of it, but if I need a little financial help because school can be very expensive, right? Even going to real estate school and trying to pass the real estate exam was quite challenging that I almost gave up. And he pushed me. He goes, nope, you're tenacious. You can do it. I know you. I'll pay for your next exam, right? That's how independent we both are. So it works for us.
It's nice that you were able to have a healthy and supportive relationship compared to in the past. But we'd like to thank you so much for being on the podcast and using your voice to help others heal from abuse.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your story.
Well, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. And I hope it does help other women out there that they're not alone and they can make it. They can find someone special out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
How long you guys been together?
13.
13 years. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a good couple.
Never looks through my phone, never checks who I'm calling, who I'm talking to, where am I? Why aren't you home? I have none of that.
And that's what you're used to. So that's amazing.
It just made us stronger, Brenda. Made you stronger. You'll get there.
Yeah.
You will get there.
Thank you for sharing your story, Irma. Next up, we have Janie.
Well, hello, and thanks for listening to the Real People, Real Voices on the Hang On to Hope podcast. This is Karen W., and today we're welcoming Janine to share her story of overcoming homelessness and abuse. So welcome to the show, Janine.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it was so great to meet you at the singles event that I met you at and be inspired when I heard about, you just shared. I didn't even hear all of your story, but the little bit I did hear about it, I was so inspired by everything you've had to overcome at such an early age. Do you just want to start out giving a little bit of your background?
Sure. We started out, we came from back east. We were driving to California. Our car broke down here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm still here. So that should tell you something about how much money we had to go where we were going. I grew up very, very poor. It was myself, my mom and dad, and my two brothers and my little sister.
Where were you guys going from? Or where were you guys at?
We were heading from Ohio to California. My aunt and uncle lived in California.
Okay.
We never made it there. My dad got a job here in Arizona. He was a mechanic, and we were always extremely poor. Not because we had to be, but because he would generally spend his money before he even got home with it. He had a gambling problem, a drinking problem, and chasing women problem, all of which costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so we lived on our last dime all the time.
Yeah, I grew up with very little money too. So I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Hi, this is Brenda J. Nice to meet you. Can you tell us a little of your abuse story?
Yeah, my dad was a heavy drinker. He would come home and he would beat my mom. Sometimes he'd wake us all up in the house and force us to watch him beating my mom. They would often fight in the middle of the night. They would argue. And what I gathered was he didn't want children, and she was the one that wanted children. And I would hear that all the time, how I didn't want these kids. You wanted these kids. They weren't my idea. Now you take care of them. My job is just to work and bring home the money, and you take care of these kids. I want nothing to do with them. And I was hearing this all the time, how unwanted I was. I think the words were worse than the physical abuse because I constantly got the impression that nobody wanted me.
Mm-hmm.
And there was never a lot of money spent on us. Very little was spent on school clothes. My mom would make a lot of the clothes on her sewing machine. When I was 6 years old, I was ironing for money. My mom would iron for money. We would take that little bit of money and put it aside for a little bit of school clothes and a pair of shoes for school. Often our electricity was shut off, our gas was shut off, or we had a phone for a brief stint of time. There was just a lot of abuse, and it was never ending. There was one night in particular when I was 7, my little sister was 4, my dad came home and he shot up the house with a shotgun. I remember being woke up and coming out of the bedroom into the hallway and seeing my dad in a drunken stupor with the shotgun in his hand. And I looked to the right where my mom and dad's bedroom was, and I saw cotton matting all over the floor. They had an antique bed with a cotton matting mattress and a steel frame bed, and it was a foot deep. And I was convinced in my mind, my little mind, that my mom is dead somewhere in that cotton matting. And I wasn't afraid. I was more afraid of being alone because in my mind I thought, well, now there's nobody to take care of us.
Yeah.
So I might as well be dead too. And for some reason, my dad just kind of snapped out of his stupor and ran out of the house. The next thing I know, we were transported by the police to these people's house. I was told the lie that they were friends of my parents, which I never could figure out if they were friends of my parents. How come they didn't drink? They didn't smoke. They didn't cuss. I've never seen them at the bar at the poker games, but yet they were supposedly friends of my parents. It took years later a counselor to help me realize that I was actually in foster care.
Oh, wow.
You just didn't realize it at the time.
No, you just believe the lies. As a matter of fact, when we were brought back home, I asked what happened to the other bed. And they said, what do they acted like it was a bad dream that I had. Even though we had a different bed and everything. I constantly was questioning my own sanity because I was always told that all these things that I was thinking and experiencing were bad dreams. They weren't real. So
you left? Didn't you say you left?
Yeah.
What age was it that you actually? Yep.
It was when I was 14, I packed a few clothes in a pillowcase and I told my mom I was leaving. I really couldn't take any more. And she said to me, I'll never forget, she said, "Is it your daddy? Do you want me to talk to him?" And I was speechless at this point because obviously all the things he'd been doing to all of us, I mean, he was abusive in every way, needed a whole lot more than talking to. I mean, the police should have arrested him and hauled him off a long time ago. So just the fact that in her mind, she thought she could talk to him just showed me that she was in a fantasy world. She just wasn't in reality.
Yeah.
And I felt safer leaving at 14 than I did staying. So I left. And for 3 weeks, I lived between two buildings. A friend of mine from school found me a place to live, and it was a party house. So I went from living between two buildings to a party house and selling carnations on 35th Avenue in Peoria for money. So I would have peanut butter and jelly and a loaf of bread or whatever. And I got into that whole lifestyle. There was drugs. There was just all kinds of things. But even everything I experienced wasn't as scary as home. Nobody reported me missing because the last thing you want is somebody asking why your teenage daughter would leave home. Do you know any reason why? When there's plenty of reasons why.
Yeah.
And I ended up at 16, I had a baby with one of the boys that lived in that house, the party house. And I came home for a brief stint of time. The abuse was still there. I ended up leaving again, and I moved in with my boyfriend at the time, the baby's father. And that's how I got out of there. At 18, I got what I called a real job because I was old enough to have a real job by then. School had already been messed up for me. I ended up going back to school, getting a GED, which has always felt like a failure for me. It's embarrassing to even put on a job application that you have a GED because immediately people think you're a loser. And I really didn't see any choice for me. I tried continuing going to school when I was on the streets, and it was literally impossible because you need to find a restroom to wash up in the morning, and then you need to make your way to school. And after about a couple of weeks, I quit trying.
Yeah, you're just on survival mode, I'm sure, at that point.
Yeah.
But, you know, the working the job was a good thing. And I thought, I'm just going to work my way out of this. And I had my dreams. I always had these dreams like, I'm going to do something with my life. I'm going to be important, and somebody's going to want me, and people are going to love me. I'm going to be so awesome. People will want to love me. And I was into earning love. It was coming from, I had no good example of what real love was. So I was attracted to needy people that would exploit me. And I was constantly helping them because I wanted people to love me. I craved it. It was a vacuum in me that I did not have filled. I had no way to fill it. And I got exploited a lot financially, and not just needy males that came into my life, but there were, even my female friends were always conniving people that just basically used me. And it got to the point where when I was 19, I was at a low point because I thought, I'm not getting where I want to go. I don't know why. I don't know what's missing. But I was filled with a lot of fear, a lot of bitterness, a lot of hatred and mistrust. And all these loser friends that I surrounded myself with didn't help any of that. Well, I ended up running into some Christians, and they led me to Jesus Christ. And I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior.
And that was when you were 19?
When I was 19.
Wow.
Actually, it was about 2 weeks before my 19th birthday, because you were supposed to be able to drink back then at 19. And I got saved, and my friends were giving me a hard time because I wouldn't drink. So I was changing. And if you want God to bring new friends into your life, you really have to let go of the old ones. You can't keep the old ones until he brings the new ones around. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But anyway, my life started improving. I started getting promoted at work. I was saving money. I just coincidentally had this show called Crown Financial Ministries that would play every morning on my way to work. And when I would drop my daughter off at daycare, I would hear this every single morning. I would hear all these tips on money tips and how to save money and how to make your money grow and how to save money on car insurance and all these different things. And I, at the time I thought, you don't look at these things when you're hearing them and think this is a divine intervention. But I really believe now this was a divine intervention because this wasn't the only thing that happened to me. I had a supervisor approach me and asked me why I wasn't putting into the 401k. And I said, well, I can't afford to. And she said, well, you can't afford not to. There's no other way out of poverty. If you're going to keep scrimping by, you need to be able to save some money to invest later on. So she convinced me somehow, and I started investing money. And in a year's time, the stock for the company doubled. I thought, well, I just really got lucky. But once again, I really believe it was divine intervention. I got more and more promotions at work. I mean, things were turning out really much better for me. I went to counseling. I had had nightmares, night terrors, and insomnia all my life. And I finally went to some counseling and explained to the lady that she was a Christian psychologist. And I told her exactly everything that happened in my life. And she started praying with me and praying for me. And she turned me on to some spiritual books. Out of the Darkness was one of them. And it was about how there's a whole spiritual realm that we don't really see of darkness that wants to take over your life. And once we accept Christ, we have power over that darkness. And I really didn't feel like I had power before then. And learning from all these books and things that I was learning, I was realizing my power in Christ, and that Christ loved me and didn't want me to be a victim for the rest of my life and hateful and holding a grudge.
So it gave you some empowerment.
That's amazing that coming to Christ and seeing that therapist and using those books all were things to help you to heal.
Well, I was just going to ask how your childhood affected your later relationships.
Yeah, I was attracted to losers, people that needed fixing. And I thought if I helped them enough, they would love me. And God doesn't want us not to help people, but we really need to choose wisely the Bible also says not to cast our pearls before swine. Right. And people were just exploiting me. And I thought I was being a good Christian. Even after I became a Christian, I still was kind of sucked into that whole letting people exploit me thing. And it took a while to break free of that and use my gifts that God has given me to help others that God draws me to. God will bring the people into your life that he wants you to help. There's been times where I can look across a room and I can just see a lady and I know that she's been abused. She's been physically abused. She's been sexually abused. She's been exploited. There's something wrong, and God will touch my heart and tell me to go talk to her. You know, I don't think that's something that's just, it takes one to know one. I don't think that's just something that just happens to everybody.
No, and it's a lot of when you're abused in a lot in your life, like I was too, it's hypervigilance. In addition to God giving you wisdom and that discernment, it's that we're more sensitive. Like we can read people because we had to, because we were abused.
Yeah.
Yes.
Part of it. Because
you probably always had to wonder like what kind of mood your dad was in or what kind of mood your mom was in.
You can read the air. You can feel the energy because you had to. You just have to use it for good. I guess it's a gift, right? It seems like it's helpful.
It's something you can use for good.
Helpful,
for sure.
Yeah, I really don't feel like, a lot of people say, I don't want to think about my past is gone, or they get stuck in their past. I'm not stuck in my past, but I'm not throwing it away either because it helped me to grow into the person I am today. If it hadn't been for my past, I would not be who I am today. God had a purpose. Yeah. I may not have seen it at the time, but he had his purpose. He had his reasons for allowing all that to happen. Yeah, we don't always see it.
You had shared that when I met you too, that's a big part of what you do in your work now, right? I was so inspired by that, how everything you've been through now you're using to help other people.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I've helped. When I was a supervisor, I was helping employees get out of debt. I was doing budget plans for them. I was helping them invest in their 401ks. There's been several women that I have counseled that have been in abusive situations, and I've helped get them out of those abusive situations. I just look at this as a gift that God gives me. If you've got horrible things in your past, what a better way to get back at the darkness and the devil than to use it all for good.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You can overcome it and use it as a positive.
100%.
Yeah. Did you struggle with your spiritual?
Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, when I was embracing bitterness and self-pity is kind of a certain glory that you ascribe to yourself. All these terrible things happened to me, so therefore I have a right to feel sorry for myself because it's legitimate. Well, that keeps you stuck. And I was mad at God because I thought, if God loved me, why did he let me come into this family? And why did he let all these horrible things happen to me? And why couldn't I finish school? And why this and why that? And, I just had this chip on my shoulder towards God because I thought, if anything, you're a bad father too, because you let this happen. And I couldn't let it go for the longest time. And there was no healing until I did. I had to forgive my natural father and I had to forgive my heavenly father before I could move on. And he has taken those ashes and turned them into glory in my life. I just feel like I am so blessed. The intuition that he's given me for other people, the heart that he's given me for other people, the intellectual knowledge that he's brought along my path. When I was in my job, my supervisor job at the ST Micro where I used to work, I had the company accountant. We were in this meeting that we had to be in every week and everybody else was always late and we would sit there for 45 minutes just staring at each other, waiting on everybody. And he ended up mentoring me in finances. I come to find out he's a multimillionaire. He owns properties all over the United States. I have several businesses. I do a house flipping business. I've just got one that we just sold a couple days ago on the market. I have a business where I do paperwork and new vendor contracts for my son. I mean, all these things that happen in your life, you think they're coincidental, but then you realize later on they're not. They're really not coincidental.
Yeah, that's encouraging because sometimes I do look at that too. Struggle with, choices I made, but I know that God can take even mistakes we made, and use them for good.
Yeah. And there's been times where I would get laid off. I would lose my job and I'd have to start over again. But you're making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich on your knee and you're living between two buildings on a piece of cardboard and you just chased another bum off with a big stick. There isn't a whole lot that stresses you out after that. You always think of every situation. Well, it could be worse. I got laid off, but it could be worse. I still have a roof over my head. I'm not living between two buildings. So you kind of have to make a joke out of things sometimes just to get by. But I believe that God's had his hand on my life for a reason, because I believe even the negative things that happen in our life are to make us stronger. They're to make us into the warrior people that we are, the warrior women that we are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, that is awesome. Yeah.
All the things that you ever wanted to do, you could have a million excuses why you never finished it or never did it, or you could just continue on.
Definitely.
And I've done them all.
That's awesome. That's more than most people can say. Is there any gold nugget you'd like to share with our audience that may help them in their healing journey?
Yeah, I have a couple things. I'd like to read this poem that I wrote.
Yeah, I loved your poem.
I wrote the first part of this poem when I was 13 years old. It was right before I left home. And then the second part of this poem I wrote when I was 53, 54 years old. I found this poem in a trunk and I read it and it looked so dark. And so I wrote a new chapter for it. This is the poem. It's called The Mirror. I look into the mirror, and what do I see? A scared little girl is staring back at me. Her eyes are filled with sadness from the secrets that she keeps, the circles underneath because she rarely ever sleeps. She lays awake at night, watching her bedroom door, wondering what God ever made her for. The drunk is in the kitchen until the whiskey soothes his mind, and she is not allowed to say that he has ever been unkind. The martyr, she is fast asleep. She doesn't care, it seems. And tomorrow she will just insist it was only in your dreams. Another day is dawning, and relief is now in sight, until the darkness creeps back in, and I face the night. Now this is the second part. I look into the mirror, and what do I see? A confident woman is now staring back at me. Her eyes are filled with gladness for the days up ahead. The terror and despair transformed to hope instead. She lays awake at night and prays to God above. He teaches her forgiveness and fills her with his love. Her future is exciting now. She sets about her task. It took a lot of years for her to finally shed her mask. To everything's a purpose, although I may not understand. If nothing else, to reach out and lend a helping hand to others who are hurting, and I can sense their pain. I will introduce them to the one who heals my shame.
Yeah.
When you've gone through all the things that I've gone through, the enemy tries to put a false sense of shame on you that really doesn't belong to you. It's not yours. And he gets you to stop dreaming. And God wants us to dream. He says in the Bible that without a vision, the people perish. Well, a vision is a dream. I was always in trouble in school for daydreaming, looking out the windows and daydreaming. And I think I did it because my life had nothing good in it. So I daydreamed a new life.
Right. You just had to escape it. It's your way of escaping.
So if I had one nugget I would share with people is just never let go of your dreams and speak them into your life. Keep saying it until it happens. Never let go of it. Never let anybody discourage you or make you think that your dreams are stupid. I would just grab them and run with them.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. And I love how you
Yeah.
were able to find that poem and then add such the positive out of all that and see that growth,
Yeah.
that you've been through all these years. I love that.
And it is scriptural. God wants to give us the desires of our hearts.
Yeah.
We just have to seek Him first.
Right. So thank you so much for sharing your story and for being on our podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you. I really wanted to do something with this poem all these years. I always felt like God wanted me to write.
Perfect. It works perfectly.
Yeah, I loved it. When you shared that, I was like, that's perfect. Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening. And until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.